Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special interview. My name is Dennis from Collider Games. I'm joined by the director, Josh Tsui, of Insert Coin, which is a documentary about the history and kind of the rise of popularity of Midway Games. And you have a special relationship with Midway Games because you actually played several characters in the Mortal Kombat series, including Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat 2, Liu Kang in Mortal Kombat 4, and many others. I guess my first question to you is, what made you interested in doing this documentary? I mean, I know you have a personal relationship with it, but to take on a documentary is a big task.
Yeah, absolutely. I when I was in college, I went to film school, and so I always wanted to get into films. To be honest with you, I grew up in Southern California, and there was that whole culture, and I kind of got into video game development by accident. Midway, back in the early '90s, was one of my first jobs coming out of college. And so, I went in thinking I was going to do it for a couple of years and then go back into filmmaking, and I got stuck in video game development. So like 25 years later, really, I jokingly say that this is kind of like my midlife crisis or my grad school in filmmaking. I felt like I need to get a film out of my system, and I really didn't know what kind it was going to be. But it just dawned on me that a documentary of that era of video games, Midway in particularly, was something that I thought I can handle. I can sink my teeth into it, and that it was just born from that.
Yeah, and before I ask you the next question, I forgot to mention this documentary is going to be available on November 25th on Alamo On Demand and virtual cinema, so people can pay attention to that and watch it there. The initial start to this, I saw you started a Kickstarter, I think in 2015. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a Kickstarter campaign in 2015, and in some ways, I used Kickstarter kind of in a way to find out if the idea was valid. To be quite honest with you, so I set, back then on Kickstarter, people would put Kickstarters up at with a really low goal, and I went in thinking I'm going to do what I think is what it's going to actually cost to do, and if it gets funded, that means it's a good idea. If it doesn't get funded, then maybe it wasn't meant to be. So in many ways, it was kind of like kicking the tires. And so I shot the trailer, put it up there, and it did really well.
What was your initial goal?
The initial goal was I can't remember. I think like 70 or 75,000. And when and at the time, and this is my own naivety because this is my first time making a documentary. I thought to myself, okay, that seems about right. I mean, I'll probably have to throw some money in afterwards, but that seemed about right. And so went above that goal, which I was very thankful about. But then, over the years, 5 years later, the scope of the documentary kept growing and growing. And this goes with any creative project. You think you can go in one direction, especially in documentaries, it just ends up going a whole different way, which benefited the film immensely.
Yeah, and then you have to take into account one, the cut that Kickstarter is taking, and then also all the rewards or incentives that you're providing as well that you have to subtract from what you actually raised.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was and I'm glad it's coming to an end, but trying to get all this physical stuff together now to ship. That's like my new nightmare after making a film.
Yeah. So a question I want to ask you, because I kind of grew up in I think the same era as you, and arcades were like a big thing. Not as much today. Like, what do kind of arcades mean to you? And then your experiences as not an employee of Midway, but as a fan of their games.
Yeah, it's strange. I grew up with the arcades of the '80s. I was a total arcade rat. I mean, that's my brothers managed a giant arcade in Pointy Hills, California. That was called Showboat Golf and Games. Like 3 floors of a Mark Twain boat. That was all arcade game. So I was living the dream of every kid. I had a sack of tokens, playing games constantly and stuff. And so when I got when I got my job at Midway, in many ways, it was like a childhood dream come true. A lot of my heroes back in the day, especially Eugene Jarvis, who did Defender and Robotron, he was still working, at Midway at the time. And so it was amazing as a fanboy to go in and suddenly be immersed in this culture. So the 80s were great. The irony of it is that the 90s arcade scene was almost, as a game player, was almost non-existent to me, because we were working on the games and we would go to the arcade to test out the games and get feedback and things like that. But it was never on a social level. It was never on a gamer level. It was really about work. And so a lot of times when I talk to people who love these games that were produced by Midway, in that era, they talk about how much joy it gave them. Like, especially when they were teenagers and things like that, gave them a place to play. For me, it was like, yeah, I loved working at Midway, but all I remember are the late night crunches, and not seeing my wife for days on end, and just the blood, sweat, and tears of the game. So yeah, I have this weird dynamic with that.
Yeah, I also was huge into arcades in the 80s and 90s, and I feel like there was like that big boom in the early to mid 90s with Street Fighter, Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat, and all that stuff. And then nowadays you have kind of a small resurgence with barcades and whatnot.
Yeah, that's been really interesting to see. I never thought that arcades would come back and become barcades, and it's kind of cool. It's now all the teenagers are adults now, so they gotta they get to drink and relive their childhood.
So what are your kind of favorite arcade games of all time, or maybe favorite arcade memories?
Man, arcade favorite arcade games of all time. I in no particular order, it would be Robotron, Mortal Kombat 2, NBA Jam, and Asteroids, for different reasons and such. My favorite memory is as a teenager going to this arcade in Pasadena it used to be called Pac-Man Arcade there on Colorado Boulevard. And I used to go there like really late at night. This is when I was in high school and such. And I don't know how I got away with that. Like I would be there like 2 a.m. And it was just really, looking back, I was like, wow, that was kind of scary. Like I'm surprised I just, I didn't get into all kinds of trouble. But it just seemed so magical at the time, because, we'd be out late, we'd go see a midnight movie, we'd go hit that arcade, we'd be there all night and stuff like that. And it was this dark and dank place. And but it was just, it was our place. It was our place to go play some games.
Nice. And then, in the process of doing this documentary, you already have relationships with Midway, but was there anything interesting or new that you discovered that kind of surprised you?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that I'm not sure if it was like completely new, but it was interesting to hear the other side of the story about things. I was on the game design end of things, so I saw that part. And we really didn't have a whole lot of interactions with the executives and the money aspect, of the business. And so in talking with our CEO and our vice president, it was interesting to see, their take on things and why certain decisions were made. I think another really interesting, set of stories was how a lot of people forget how big the arcade industry was in the 90s. And so especially the Midway team, they're making billion-dollar franchises. So there were other companies trying to poach them and take them out of the company. And I had always heard stories about this, but here and there, but to hear directly from everybody, like what they went through. Yeah, Steven Spielberg's jet came down and picked them up to take them to LA. They had, they're talking to the chairman of MCA Universal. I mean, it was crazy. They were like, jetting around the world, and it wasn't just Universal. Like Sony was trying to steal them, Microsoft trying to steal them. And again, I knew about these things, but hearing them talk about it, I was like, the first thing in my mind was, why didn't you guys leave? That sounded like it would be it would be amazing, because we were working in such crappy conditions. We're in the back of a factory. There were like rats in our vending machines and things like that. And to hear, about these companies throwing money at them and them not taking it, was pretty astounding.
Yeah. Out of all the kind of franchise, because, Midway is known for a lot of franchises: Mortal Kombat,
Yep.
NBA Jam, Smash TV, Narc, all that stuff. Which one did you find out was like maybe the most difficult game that was developed in terms of, I don't know, kind of behind the scenes drama, or like the decision of the design of the game?
Yeah, I think, every game had its challenges. And I think the one thing, the game that really like shifted the tone of the way the teams worked at Midway was this game called War Gods, and it was Midway's first attempt at a 3D fighting game. And so this is, Tekken had already come out at that point, Virtua Fighter had come out, but Midway was still doing the 2D Mortal Kombat game. So this one team wanted to do a 3D fighting game. Now, this team was not the Mortal Kombat team. So basically, Mortal Kombat is the biggest franchise, for the company, if not for just the industry in general. And all of a sudden, another team inside of Midway wants to make a fighting game. And so this is a reflection on how the company was run. Like, management let them do it. Even though MK was wildly successful, they were just like, people can do whatever they want. These guys want to do a 3D fighting game, so be it. There was no like planning out the lineup or anything like that. And so these people, this team made this 3D fighter, and they had a certain amount of arrogance about the way they were going to make the game and how they were going to be better than Mortal Kombat, and just created all kinds of tension, in the studio. And one of the lines from the movies was that whenever the War God team would walk by the Mortal Kombat team's office, the Mortal Kombat team would just shut their door on them. Like, they just slammed the door right in their faces. So and there was a shift because there's so much money involved, because the teams would get royalties off the sales of games. And so because of that, like, people started competing more and more as they became more successful. And a lot of risks would happen from that.
Yeah, definitely. And then, you interview a bunch of different people in the industry, especially at Midway. Like, can you give us some examples of kind of the more interesting people that you talk to?
Yeah, so beyond the team at Midway, I was very fortunate to get a lot of people that were either like fans of Midway or who were notable in the industry. And so Jeff Gersman was interviewed, and because he was like a Midway super fan, back in the day. So he had some great insight. Ernest Cline, the author of Ready Player One, he was gracious enough to let me interview him, and we had a really great time. And he is just like an encyclopedia of not just pop culture but of video games. And I was like kind of shocked by some of the stuff that he would bring up. And he had a great story about Smash TV and how he spent I don't know how much money trying to get to a secret level that he later found out never existed. And it was talked about in the game. Hey, if you did everything perfect, you're gonna see the secret level that's called the Pleasure Dome, and you're gonna get it's like being in paradise. And so he brought the story up, and I didn't even know about it. And later on, I interviewed Marc, the designer of the game. I brought that up to him, and it's like, oh yeah, I got in a lot of trouble for that. We never put that in there.
Funny, because it's like back then, like the internet wasn't as prevalent, where you could, if there was a rumor nowadays, right, you could kind of figure out like, okay, is this really true or not? Has anyone actually done this? And back then it's like, you hear about something, and you're like, oh, maybe you can do that or whatnot. Sometimes arcade games, I remember, had like glitches or bugs in them, and people would purposely like create the bugs just to see it happen in the games, and stuff like that. How talking to, you've been working on this documentary for many years now. Have you yourself been able to have any time to like keep up and play any games in general?
Oh man, very, very little. It's just, that's one of, and not just because of the film, like even, in game development, sometimes it's like you're making games so much that by the time you get home, like sitting down to play a game is just, it can sometimes feel like work, So I've been playing a lot of games on the Switch lately, mainly because it's just convenient, and my kids are playing on it all the time. And so I'll pop in for like shorter games, anything that, I mean, in all honesty, anything that feels arcadey that I can go in and play really quick and kind of get out. Those are the games I'm starting to gravitate more now. But I like most recently we got Killer Queen on the Switch, which is a fantastic game, and it reminds me a lot of Joust, which was like one of my favorite games when I was younger. So we've been playing that. It's a great party game. So that's where a lot of our time has been spent lately.
Yeah. In the documentary, people mentioned like kind of the feel of Midway Games was almost like punk
Yeah.
rock, where people, were able to experiment. And you mentioned even like with War Gods or whatever, they just let them go and do that. How did you find people's kind of looking back now at what the game development culture was like? It's like, was it like a good thing, bad thing, a balance? Like, was it too too much freedom, or too restrictive? What was their kind of
Yeah.
response to that?
Yeah, I think, man, it's a mixed bag, right? I mean, the team was kind of left Lord of the Fly style to just do what the hell they want to do, and it worked. I think for its time, it worked for the type
Mhm.
of games that were being made by Midway. And arcade games, if you think about, it, they're not large games, so they're just like crazy sensory overload that you play, sink some quarters in, and you're pretty much done after a few minutes. Um, that I think that worked out really well for that style. I think as games got bigger, consoles became more powerful. Something you can play Metal Gear Solid on the on PS1 for hours on end. That This type of management style that Midway had just was not going to scale up properly for that.
Mhm.
So I think when I look back on it, I look back on it fondly because I love the freedom, and I made a lot of games since then, and they've gotten bigger and bigger. And Midway, I always say, was like the most well-funded group of indie developers because they were pretty much left alone. Whereas later on, you have publishers and investors to make sure you're keeping happy. You have more strict deadlines and things like that. And so there was a different set of disciplines. So and not that and those disciplines are important, but I always think back to myself, oh man, it was it was nice to just kind of go rogue.
Mhm. So I mentioned before about kind of the popularity and rise of arcades, and like kind of the home consoles kind of came in, and people were focused on that. Now we have the rise of the barcades, but now with the pandemic happening,
Yeah.
uh, what do you think about the future of the kind of the arcade like uh experience?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know that there are still arcade manufacturers out there, and like place like these giant games that you see at like Dave and Buster's and GameWorks and things like that. They still exist, but yeah, I don't know how. In all honesty, it's kind of like movie theaters. I'm not sure how people are going to get over this this comfort level. I think people are a little scarred by what's going on. So I think it's going to be a while before there's any type of recovery. I think barcade type places are probably
Mhm.
people still are going to want to go to a bar. Once they can safely go to a bar, they're going to go back and stuff. So I think those are still going to be around. But when it comes to like pure arcades or these family fun centers, that I can't predict how that's going to work out. But I think it's like somebody's going to figure out a way of innovating on that to get people comfortable again. I just don't know what that's going to be.
Yeah. So do you have any last thoughts or anything that you want to tell the audience about the documentary, about like whether it's a funny story or what they should, be looking out for, or, just a general what you got out of it in terms of when it was all, how a lot of documentaries, you start off thinking one thing and then
Yeah.
the end, you have a completely different perspective on something.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want people to get out of the documentary is that to get some insight on how games are made. I think a lot of people know these games. They know them from their childhood, and in the case like Mortal Kombat, that's still a franchise that's going on strong now. But I think when they see the documentary, they'll see just the sheer amount of work, not just creatively, but also on the business sense and how games are done and how much work is involved and the type of personality that is needed to make these games. I think they'll come out of it with a deeper appreciation of these games that they played from their childhood. And I didn't want to make a documentary that was just a clinical behind the scenes thing or something that you can easily get from Wikipedia. This is really a story about how this team kind of came together, how they were formed, and how they and how they kind of navigated these waters. And there's a real story arc here that they can follow. And so I'm hoping that it just gives them a deeper appreciation of their childhood memories.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's Insert Coin, the documentary. Josh Tsui directed it. It comes out on November 25th on Alamo On Demand and in virtual cinemas. Check it out.
So you can get all the information about the documentary on insertcoindoc.com. And we also have it on Twitter and Instagram, which is insertcoindoc. And particularly on the website itself, there's a screening page, so you can go there and get links to all the virtual cinemas where you can stream the film as on top of Alamo Drafthouse.
All right, everyone, follow all those social media channels and watch out November 25th for Insert Coin.